Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Melvyn, and I am here warmly welcoming you to episode 001 of the Creative Influencer Show. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that I think it's on the mind of many of us as entrepreneurs, and that is the top challenges faced by entrepreneurs. And so here we go. So, top challenges faced by entrepreneurs. Now, to begin with, I think first and foremost, entrepreneurs are good problem solvers to begin with, because if you're not solving a problem, you're not in business. So, here's how we think about commerce in the past. In the past, you would create a product or a solution and you go out and tell the whole world how great your product is, and you basically look for people to buy. But this is not how business is done right now. Now, business is done through finding a problem and becoming the one with the best or most desirable solution to solve that problem. In other words, no problem, no business. Which brings to mind the process which we call design thinking. Now, design thinking essentially it's about instead of being seduced to create a solution, and trying to convince the world that they need it. Design thinking actually looks at creating a solution because there is a need for it to begin with. Now, and in design thinking, this is what we call the empathy stage. Now, we'll talk about design thinking in a separate episode sometime in the near future, but this is in a nutshell what design thinking is. And if you look at this picture, you will have an idea of what I'm talking about here. In this picture here, it says that smartwatches it says that smartwatches are a solution in search of a problem. It's a technology created not to serve consumer demand, but to serve the need of device manufacturers to fill the revenue hole created by declining smartphone growth. Now, well, whether you agree with that statement or not, one thing you have to admit is that where a solution is created because it is what this entrepreneur think that it is a good thing, it may or may not be the solution that customers are looking for. Now, let's take a look at 3 businesses that solve a problem by employing that same method of identifying problem or a challenge and then investing time to learn more about it before creating a solution. The first one that I am bringing up here is Dropbox. Now, I think many of us, or in fact all of us here, would know Dropbox. Basically, Dropbox solved the problem of having to carrying your files in a thumb drive or in a hard disk, or having to keep duplicate files in multiple computers, and then after a while you kind of lose track which is the most updated version, and everything just kind of goes downward from there. And so the solution that Dropbox bring about is that it allows you to bring your files anywhere. Yeah, without having the need to carrying a external hard drive or a thumb drive with you, which oftentimes that the piece of hardware might fail on you. I mean, I've heard countless times where people encounter carrying around a hard disk and then they say, "Oh no, my hard disk crashed." Yeah, okay, so that is Dropbox. Now let's look at another business I think many of you are familiar with. I certainly have been using their services the last few times we travel. And so this is Airbnb. Now Airbnb solved the problem of property owners having their property sitting idle. So instead of having your property sit idle, that solution is actually allowing you to convert those free spaces into income by renting them out on a short-term basis. And in my last few times when we travel as a family, we've almost exclusively look at Airbnb properties because one, it's that we didn't want to stay in a hotel environment because traveling with children and with a family, you want to be able to cook. And so the Airbnb option is really something that we have been using a lot, and I believe many people that are also going down the same route as well. In fact, many of the people I know have also been using Airbnb property when they travel instead of the typical hotel. Yep. So that's business number two. Let's look at business number three. Business number three is one that is very close to my heart, and this was the consulting and training firm that I founded, built, and grew to a six-figure company in the last 12 years, and that's Line Consulting. Well, the problem that Line Consulting seek to solve was the schools in Singapore, basically at the point in time when we started, schools in Singapore was lacking the expertise and experience in school management, strategic planning, and staff resource planning. And so where we came in was to kind of introduce strategic thinking, design thinking, as well as system thinking to schools at a very simple level, and a level that the schools can identify with. So all those three businesses that we've introduced to you here today, two of which I think you are very familiar with, and one which is very close to my heart, all these three businesses survive and thrive not because they had the best solution. Quite often that may not necessarily be the case, but the point is they found a need or a problem or a challenge that the customer has, and then devise a solution to kind of solve that problem. Yeah. Now, entrepreneurs like you and just like everyone else, we all also face challenges ourselves. Now, apart from solving other people's problems, we must also be able to solve our own problems. Now let's look at, and that's where we're coming to today's topic here. Let's look at what are some of the most common problems or challenges faced by entrepreneurs. Now, in my recent research, I found a dozen articles detailing the various challenges, and no matter whether these are new entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs in India, entrepreneurs in South Africa, or even seasoned entrepreneurs, these challenges are pretty much the same. Now, before we go into that few articles, I'd like you to take a look at this graph here. And this graph is actually taken from Chubby Brain. And although it's a little dated, this graphic is actually taken from 2011. But if you look at this graphic itself, it tells you the top 20 reasons startup fail. And right at the top there was ignore customers. And right next to it is no market need. And that's precisely what we have been talking about earlier, whereby we say that, as entrepreneurs, we're first and foremost good problem solvers, because if there's no problem, if there is no problem, there's no business. Yeah, and we went on to showcase three businesses that basically identify a problem and solve the problem by providing a solution, which oftentimes is the most desirable solution for the customers. Yeah, so this kind of backs up the thing that we want to be talking about here earlier. And now let's look at this. Out of this dozen articles, I've pulled out three articles which are a little bit more recent. And the first article is from the website entrepreneur.com. Yeah, entrepreneur.com. Now, in this article itself, contributed by Larry Alton, this article actually looked at the 8 biggest challenges. And I will put the link to this article in the show notes, as well as in the articles that will be coming out later. In this article itself, it talks about the 8 key challenges faced by new entrepreneurs. And the one that I would like to kind of highlight too is the one on dealing with the unknown. Now, dealing with the unknown, it's something that I think many of us as entrepreneurs can identify with, because sometimes it's like, you have a situation whereby you really do not know if whether your business will be profitable, and much less whether your business will exist in the next 5 to 10 years, for example. Yeah, so dealing with the unknown is something that I think many entrepreneurs can identify with. And one more that it's quite common but not spoken about enough is the issue about loneliness. Yeah, it's a problem, but not quite often talked about. And it's what it says here: being an entrepreneur is lonely. Yeah, it's a singular position, so you won't have teammates to rely on almost completely. And you'll be working lots of hours. Sometimes you won't even see your family as often. Okay, and so as an entrepreneur, as a boss, for example, that this is one thing that you might be experiencing quite a fair bit. Yeah, and so let's look at the next article here. This next article, a shout out to Victor Pride from his website Bold and Determined. In this article here, he looked at the 10 challenges that a new entrepreneur will face, and I think it is not just for new entrepreneurs, but even seasoned entrepreneurs as well. And right off the bat, number one is picking the right business, and that's precisely what we've been talking about. Whereby, if you pick the wrong business, or you pick a business whereby you think this has got to be the best solution, I've got the best idea, but really there is no need for that solution, then really there is no business. Yeah, and so that's the article from Bowl and Determine. And let's look at a third article. This third article is from this website called Shmoop. Yeah, I hope I got it right. Well, in this article itself, challenges facing entrepreneurs, I think one of the key one that when I asked many entrepreneurs, the key one that many of them talked about is this thing called capital. Yeah, because to start any business, you're gonna need some capital, and sometimes that capital may be money, but sometimes that capital could be intellectual capital. But when I'm asked, most entrepreneurs, when they talk about capital, they are referring to the dollar sign, the money. And quite frankly, if you look at starting a business in the old model, which where you start a shop and you need the physical goods and all, yes, you will need quite a fair bit of capital because you need to have sufficient inventory. You need to rent a shop space, for example. But if you're looking at another business right now, which is digital business or digital commerce, as they call it, capital can be very, very small, and the required capital for that may be very not as much as you think it would be. Yeah, and so this is just the highlights of the three articles. And what I've done is I've looked at all these three articles and pulled out the 10 most common challenges facing entrepreneurs. And as you can see from this list here, it deals with things that we've talked about, like dealing with unknowns, but also things like quitting your day job. Because if you're transiting from employee to employer or employee to entrepreneur, one of the things is, when are you going to quit your day job? You're going to do the hustling on the side as a side gig for some time, but at some point in time, you're going to decide that I'm going to quit my day job and I'm going to pursue this full time. Well, there are many ways of doing that, and we'll cover that in a future episode here in the Creative Influencer Show. But this are essentially the top challenges facing entrepreneurs. Now, if you look at these top challenges carefully, you would see that we can further categorize them into maybe 2 or 3 broad categories. But here for today's show, I'm going to categorize them into 2 broad categories. And the first category is the category on business. Yeah, and when you look at these challenges, the list of challenges could fall under the first category called business. And business really comes down into picking the right business, as we have been talking about since the start of this show. Whether have you picked the right business, i.e., are you picking a business whereby there is a demand? Because otherwise, the next challenge would be finding customers. As I mentioned, if you start off by looking at the solution first, and then the next step you need to do is to find the customers. Yeah. And even if you have picked the right business and you have found the customers, the next thing that you really have to grapple with is dealing with competition. There will be competition, and as we will cover in a later episode, that when you go into a business, especially in the digital domain, if you find that you have gone into and you have identified a profitable niche which you think is profitable, where there is no competition, you want to be cautious about that, because if there's no competition, it might mean that there is no demand. Okay, and number four, it's building your team, and that's something that I learned, especially when I was building line consulting in the last 12 years, whereby building a team is so critical, because at some point in time, you need to be able to not just run on your own. You want to be able to expand, you want to be able to scale, you want to be able to focus on what you can do best, and so building your team, it's something that it's so crucial that I cannot emphasize more. And the last one, of course, is financing, because at some point in time, you want to grow your business, you want to take on a new level of expansion or looking into new markets. You're going to have to require some level of capital or financing. So that's the category of business challenges. And let's look at the second category, and that second category, it's personal. So apart from business challenges, there is another group of challenges which we have been talking about, and that's at a personal level. Now, as entrepreneurs, we are pretty much starting this journey on our own. And so one of the first thing that you want to identify, or you want to be able to deal with, is that the unknowns. Unknowns are scary. Unknowns bring about fear, and I will put it in the show note how I deal with the unknowns and how I deal with the fear, and how this is something that you need to overcome, because this is one of the first steps that you need to do. It's not about not having a compelling vision or not having big dreams. I'm sure every entrepreneur have big dreams, but sometimes it's to deal with the unknown, to deal with that fear, and that's how you cross from where you are towards your dream. And the other one that we talked about, it's about quitting your day job, because if you're transitioning from employee to entrepreneur, at some point in time, you got to decide, when am I going to quit my day job? And one more thing that doesn't get talked about, but I think it's very critical, it's managing own money and risk. For example, as a new entrepreneur myself, when I was starting out, one of the key things I realized was that I wasn't getting any form of insurance. And if something happened to me and I'm being the sole breadwinner, then it's going to mean it's going to be quite a financial disaster for myself as well as my family. So one of the first things that I did when I could afford it was to go out and get a sufficient coverage in terms of insurance. So one of the things I did was to get a term insurance, which is relatively inexpensive, but gives you sufficient coverage. So should something happen to me, at least the insurance kicks in, and in terms of managing my own risk and my own financial situation, that is pretty much covered. And like I mentioned earlier, the entrepreneurship, especially in the starting out days, can be quite lonely, because the people that you have hung out with are likely not to be able to understand what you're going through. And that's why seeking out a community like what we're creating here in the Creative Influencers, it's critical, because this is where you can find like-minded people who can come together, and together we can give each other support, and sometimes we can even share our own experiences, our challenges, and how we can overcome that. And at some point in time, you would also want to decide and go for looking out to hire a coach or a mentor, because that will be something that will really kind of speed up your process in the way that you do business. And the last one, I think that's a big one. It's that self-doubt, and that's something that many of us would go through at some point in time, because you will be running and and in the initial stage especially, you would be facing up a lot of obstacles. A lot of people are going to tell you no. There's going to be a lot of negativity, and at some point in time you're going to look at yourself and say that, well, maybe I wasn't that smart after all, maybe I wasn't that phenomenal after all. And so that's when self-doubt comes in. And so in future episode, we're going to be talking about how we can resolve these challenges. Notice I say resolve, not solve, because these challenges can never quite be adequately and completely solved. And we want to find the best way to kind of resolve those challenges depending on which stage you are at the entrepreneurial journey. And so going forward, what the key question I have for you is, how do you resolve these challenges? And what I have done here is I've created a survey, a very quick survey to kind of hear from you, my audience, to kind of learn from you, how do you resolve these challenges, some of these challenges. At the same time, I would also want to find out from you, what is your single greatest challenge that you're facing right now as an entrepreneur? Yep. And so you will get all this in the show notes, and I will look forward to hearing from you. And with that, with your input and your feedback and what you tell me, we'll then look at how we can kind of help you resolve those challenges in the most elegant and optimal manner. All right. And with that, thank you so much for listening and for watching. If those of you are watching on YouTube, thank you so much, and I will see you again in episode 2 of the Creative Influencer Show. Thank you, and this is Melvyn Tan signing off. Bye-bye.